How would you define self-deception? And how is that different from cognitive dissonance? Self-deception has been formulated by logicians. Make a presumption. People think in fully articulated statements, propositions. As soon as you accept that, you've run into the paradoxes of self-deception. It seems not possible to believe proposition A and proposition B at the same time. Those would be stable propositions if they conflict with one another. These leave us with two questions. 1. Does people actually think in fully articulated propositions, but it's not the only way they think? 2. What does it mean for two things to conflict? First, the second question. Often when I've read badly written essays, the writer will make a statement on page 1. And in the next two statements directly contradicts the first statement. They don't notice that two propositions are logical conflict. That means that people don't know when things are in logical conflict. The only time they realize their presuppositions about the world are in conflict is when they try to act out two contradictory notions at the same time. They find out that acting one out interferes with acting another out. Like when they enter in conflict with someone else. You don't notice your propositional conflict until you act them out and the world stops you. You can maintain contradictory cognitions without noticing how disorganized you're, because the world hasn't hit you in the face already, unless you try to act those things out. So, people can hold two contradictory propositions. Self-deception is possible. Second, the first question. The way that people generally deceive themselves is that they act out a series of propositions. And they run into evidence that that is not having the result desired. You realize that something about that proposition was faulty. But the world doesn't tell you what part of that proposition it's wrong. Something was sufficiently erroneous that you didn't get the result that was intended. So, the data is insufficiently informed to indicate to you where your mistake was made. It's subject to all potential interpretations. What people do when they deceive themselves. They lay forth a belief results not intended negative emotional state indicates an error specify the error information about the error, that can revamp the propositional sequence. It needs a lot of work to fix it, cognitive work. Generally, people don't do the work. Now, they have a representation of their failure, an encounter with chaos. Which are negative emotions, emergency preparation, and then complete indeterminacy as to the propositional nature of the information. If you do that enough times, if you engage in the process of exploration to specify what went wrong, you'll find around yourself absolute morass of chaos, an indeterminate experience. And that's the place you will end up living. That's self-deception. Do you think some people seek out drama? E.g., they make things difficult for them because they confuse it with meaning. Yes, people do that all the time. They confuse it with meaning. You give two options to people. 1. Suffer stupidly. 2. Meaningful life. You might say that people will choose a meaningful life. But the price that you pay for living a meaningful life is that you have to adopt responsibility, which is theoretically without limit. E.g., in Christianity, to live a meaningful life, it's to take the world's sins onto yourself. See inside you, all the negative potentialities of humans. Take responsibility for addressing those. If you do a thorough enough investigation into your own faults, you end up harrowing hell. Jung. So, people want to avoid that. But they use subterfuge. Because they don't want to admit that they're not taking any responsibility. They'll generate false crises in their own life and amplified problems. To convince themselves that they are effortfully struggling through all that mess. But they're not. Accompanied with deception, confusion, and avoidance. What role do you think diagnosis should play in clinical practice? To get reimbursed by insurance providers. Part of engaging in the process of diagnosis is utilize stable classifications. Because you can't understand anything about what you're dealing with, without classifying it. And diagnosis helps you identify potential pathways forward. Then you have access to the large wealth of treatment protocols that have already been developed. Helps to rule out other things. You can say, this is precisely this kind of horror that you're living, and here's what you can do about it, and other people suffered, and they recovered. So, you only need to worry about certain things. Narrows the universe of their problems from all potential problems. How do you differentiate between having an actual bad life, and having depression that makes your life bad? You can do that in multidimensional speaking. You need to know if you have a career, friends, intimate relationship, family, something of high quality that's productive to do with your life outside of work, physical and mental health. Regulate the use of your vices. If the person is functional on those dimensions, on which they're actually functional, the more they just have a bad life, and aren't depressed. So, if they have no friends, no educational history, no abilities, patchy work history, family is a nightmare. All you do is your vices. One or more physical or mental problems. Your life has fallen apart. So, it's not depression, it's only a bad life. Depression could spiral you into a place where those things are more likely. But it's more of the mismatch between function and emotion. If they have friends, good job, good family, etc. and still, they are feeling terrible and having difficult times, they might be accurately conceptualized as depressed. What are your thoughts on Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism? She is an ideologue. Her ideology runs contrary to the most prevalent modern ideology. Like political correctness. She provides the perfect antidote to that. She wrote an anti-communist vein. But she writes hero stories of a certain type. The individual against the collective. It's okay, but to think of that as the only valid hero story, is a mistake. Like a hero history, of a collective and the hero against the forces of nature. Sometimes that attitude is accurate and salutary, but not always. Do you think all presuppositions stem from religion? No. I think the deepest presuppositions are identical to religion. The most fundamental presuppositions that people make. Presuppositions are necessary. Because you have your finite cognitive agent and limited understanding. In order to deal with the world, you have to act as if certain parts of it are both understood and stable. And at the deepest level are your religious presuppositions. Whether if you think them as religious or not, it doesn't matter. If you don't think of them as religious or know that they're religious, it means that you don't know anything about your presuppositions, and anything about religion. The highest value that exists in a person's hierarchy of values is de facto equivalent to their God. Jung. Psychologically, a person's higher value served precisely as the same function that a deity serves in religious. If you're having a conversation that is digging to the bottom of things, the language has to be religious. Because it's the only language capable of encapsulating the phenomena that exists at the deepest levels of analysis. And if you never have been in a situation that you need to use religious language, it's because you've never been in the crisis that would necessitate its use. Or that you don't have it at hand, which is not good. Some researchers see shame as an emotion that is always destructive. Do you agree? No, that's ridiculous. Psychopathy and shamelessness are the same. No emotion is always destructive. Any emotion taken to an extreme can be destructive, even values. Like manic people. They are possessed by a radical excess of positive emotion. And they get incredibly impulsive. It's terribly destructive. They will spend all their money and interactions hyper-optimistic that will result in their complete ruin. Like excess of happiness. It's a pathology of positive emotion. Or shame, if you do something stupid and destructive to yourself and others. You should feel shame, pay attention to it, and learn from it. If someone don't do that, just keep them away. Shameless, you don't have enough sense to be appalled by their own pathology. What makes a successful researcher? Curiosity. Intelligence. Diligence. Then being embedded in the social network that supports research endeavors. Capability for extended collaborations. Ability to write, it's very difficult, but you need to be able to write. Enjoy it, or be compelled to do it. How do you feel psychotherapy and psychiatry should work together in curing psychological disorders? You might see psychiatry as use of psychiatric drugs. If you have a serious problem, you should be very wary in letting your a priori conviction interfere with your health. Usually people say, people are easily made to use pills. But that's wrong. People that go to a clinician, they don't go to seek for a pill for his mental illness. They don't even want to think they have a mental illness. Also, don't want to be modified by a pill. They generally feel that that's an abdication of responsibility. Terrified by the side effects. Even if they try, they want to get out as fast as possible. It's shameful for them. Like, if you're dealing with someone truly depressed, and suggest to take antidepressant, that can take months. But psychiatric medications can be useful and sometimes absolutely necessary. E.g. someone with psychosis, if you don't facilitate their use of antipsychotic medication, what you're doing border on malpractice. But the medication won't work alone. Because medication for psychiatric disorders is conceptualized as complex tools, not just as curative agents. You have to learn to use it, to figure out what the drug should be, the dose, time of the day. Those requires experience to optimize. Also, how to use those medications while you're simultaneously modifying your attitude or your life, in order to progress forward properly. So, sometimes it's better to address problems with psychiatric medication. That can save your life and family. The probability of suicide if you're depressed is quite high. So, you want to stave that off, with medications. Used as tools in a sophisticated way within a therapeutic alliance. Like antidepressants, side effects might be bad. Even if they work, they might interfere with people's sexual function, Antidepressants are good for fixing premature ejaculation. Low sexual response, inhibited sexual desire. If you use them improperly, they can do more damage than good. How should you decide between being hard on yourself and giving yourself a break? In my clinical practice, lawyers are hyper-conscientious and competitive. And they ask me, how hard should I work? It's useless to say you should seek some appropriate work-life balance. Because, if you're in a highly competitive job, you're chased by your peers and your clients and the marketplace to work flat out as fast as you can. The question should be, under what conditions should you not do that? Piaget. You shouldn't work as hard that you can't continue to work that hard. You're working 80 hours a week. And don't take a day off, you'll eventually hurt yourself in a manner that will make it impossible to work 80 hours a week. That's obviously counterproductive. In order to maximize your productivity, you need to care of yourself, or you're gonna burn out, depressed, anxious, exhausted. So, you have to learn how much work you can do, how much leisure you need, and how much to be involved in activities outside of your work. E.g., female lawyers, when they hit 30, starts to getting very disillusioned with their job. Because they make partners, that they are associated with all the foibles associated with normal people. There's a decline in idealism. And they realize that there is more in life than working like a mad dog for 80 hours a week. So, they end up working fewer hours but billing more hours. Also take 1 to 2 days off. They can't work shorter hours, but they can plan to take time off in the future regularly. Maybe 1 week vacation every 3 months. And the boost they get from the vacation increases their ability to concentrate at work, and makes them more valuable as a practicing partner. How can you work productively so you have the longest possible productive and sustainable career? So, if you don't do that in your life, you will end up with resentment and hating your job. To figure that out, if you're young, is to pick something difficult to do, and you work yourself half to death doing it. To figure out where your actual limits are. Psychological and physiological endurance. Once you exceeded your limits, pull back to the point where that becomes sustainable. Then, you're hard with yourself and you're pursuing that in the best possible health, and the highest probability to continuing in a high-quality manner into the future. Is the fact that so many are against euthanasia a symptom of individuals and a societal aversion to death, or is it of the more practical issues like consent and morality? The slippery slope can go from, it's okay if someone who's terminally ill wants to die, to, let's empty the hospitals of all the people who are no longer being socially productive. That's a road that societies travel down a tiny little step at a time. So, when you open euthanasia, you're also opening up endless cans of snakes. I think of euthanasia like torture. Like high levels of threat as an interrogation technique. You should be willing to undergo prosecution for your actions. Nietzsche. Nobody who's truly lived hasn't experienced the necessity of killing. I had my dog put down in February. He was done, allowing him to expire naturally just involved nothing but a lot of unnecessary suffering. So, you might think of euthanasia like something ethical on those situations. But it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be surrounded by high thickets of illegality. Sometimes to do the right thing you're required to break the law and be punished for it. Also, I think answer those questions is a mistake. Because the devil is always in the details. Is there a way to find your true passion, or is that just a cliché? It's actually a cliché. You can find what compels you, and enable you to live in a high-quality manner despite the suffering that's associated with life. And you discover that, by watching yourself and learning when it's that you're meaningfully engaged. So, you have to notice that it's something that happens to you, rather than something that you do. Then you have to expand the amount of time that you spend in that state. Also, there are moral requirements that go along with that. E.g., someone who finds torturing animals is meaningfully engaging. That's a meaningful engagement that you don't want to expand. So, if you're to set up your life to maximize your meaningful engagement, you have to take into account. Get very clear about who you are and what you're doing. Also have to do such things as endeavor to stop deceiving yourself and others. Because if you engage in deception, you pathologize the structure of your being and your nervous system. And then you can't trust its reports. So, if you're going to rely on your nervous system's reports of meaningful engagements to guide your future activities, you better do everything you can to make sure that you're not filling your nervous system with garbage that's going to malfunction and give you false reports. Moving towards meaningful engagement has to be associated with making truth your highest value. Because otherwise you can't trust yourself as your own guide. People aren't pure by nature. Also, corrupt beyond belief individually. And we have to use society as a source of value. So, if you're going to personalize your life, you better act in a manner that makes you a reliable guide.